Hi everybody, and welcome to the latest episode 8 I think, of Wild Wild Podcast, and I am joined as ever by my co-host Rod Barnett. Hi Rod.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Pretty good. It's an extremely humid and hot summer here in the middle of Tennessee, and that is making the suffering pretty strong, but hey, what can you do?
I think that kind of sounds like it'd be quite nice, but I suppose it's only nice if you've got aircon.
It is. The moment you step outside, it's as if you've stepped into a sauna. Sweat immediately appears on any exposed flesh, and you begin to realize that there are parts of your body that just should not feel that way, and it's awful.
I mean, we'll get to when we get to our film in a minute. Some of the shooting, the location shooting for this film looks like they must have been boiling.
Oh yeah.
But and wearing those costumes. But
especially Richard Kiel, some of the costuming he's wearing out in that blazing hot sun is like, man.
Yes. Still, at least he wasn't dressed as Chewbacca. I suppose it could have been worse.
Yeah, true.
But anyway, we'll get to that. We'll get to the nature of the Star Wars similarities between this week's film in a moment.
Metropolis, known ages ago as planet Earth, now faces its gravest hour. Lord Growl has just escaped from the prison satellite, where his brother, ruler of the peaceful galactic democracy, had exiled him. Malevolent and power-hungry, Growl has plans of vengeance that might forever alter the destiny of mankind.
Referencing pop culture in your films is now the thing that everybody wants to do. Obviously, Stranger Things and Ready Player One is on. Back in 1979, we've got an Italian filmmaker here doing it, not so much, kind of referencing as just blatantly ripping off. But it's kind of interesting to think now, if somebody made a film like The Humanoid now, it would probably be considered to be hilariously ironic and postmodern, whereas because it came out in 1979, it's just a Star Wars ripoff. But is this film just a Star Wars ripoff, or is there more to it? Stay tuned whilst we try and figure that out for ourselves. So we're continuing our journey through the Italian science fiction films where there is some element of going to space. We began with kind of rocket launches, and now here we are in full-blown Star Wars space fantasy territory. And so the Humanoid. So last time we talked about Star Crash, and these two films really work together in the Star Wars knockoff kind of vein.
Yeah.
In fact, a couple of years ago, I had very serious daydreams about creating a Star Wars rip-offs film festival, and I thought that would be such a great idea for a festival, and I was going to call it Battles Beyond Star Wars. And I actually made quite a few inquiries. I found a venue, I found an artist who was going to do me a poster, all kinds of, but then of course COVID hit and killed all of our dreams. And so I haven't really picked up on that one again. But there are a lot of, not just the Italians, other people were doing these kinds of films too. The Turkish one, most notably, Turkish Star Wars, which incidentally I'm going to cover on the next episode of my other podcast. So watch out for that one. And there's the Italian film as well. Is that called Battle in Space?
Oh my goodness!
What did I say?
I'm not sure which one you're talking about.
Japanese film is what I meant to say.
Oh yes,
it's the Japanese film, Battle in Space. So there's a whole bunch of them. Plus, of course, on television, there was this was the era of Battlestar Galactica, the new Buck Rogers, and everybody was going space crazy in the late 70s and early 80s. It was a pretty exciting time to be a kid, with all this stuff on TV and Star Wars toys and
I think it's something that you and I should probably. I mean, we're a little older, and sometimes we forget that there can be fairly young people who might hear what we're talking about just out of curiosity, and we should make this very clear. There was a period of time when Star Wars did not exist, and I know that sounds completely insane to anyone born, from 1980 or since. But this is true. There was a period of time when a science fiction film did not automatically mean that people were going to have to find a way around or completely delve straight head on into the influence that Star Wars has had over the genre in cinema. I mean, that's just I know it's strange, but it's true. And so there is a sharp dividing line between 1977, before and after. And so when we're dealing with something like The Humanoid or Star Crash, it's very clear that these movies were made because of Star Wars, whereas as close as you could get to a super influential film in the earlier part of the 1970s would be something like 2001: A Space Odyssey. And if you want to see, if you want to compare and contrast this severe difference in style or concept or just approach in general, then watch 2001: A Space Odyssey and Star Wars back to back, and you will understand how 2001 was working really hard to bring some intellectual heft or some thoughtfulness to the science fiction genre on camera. Whereas, and on the printed page in the past, that had been the way it was. But 2001 was essentially a big budget attempt to do something to kind of pull thoughtful science fiction in cinema away from Buck Rogers and ray guns and, that kind of thing. Where Star Wars was the antithesis of that approach.
Yeah. It was, we want to bring the ray guns back.
Right. And that is all well, fine, and good, but understand that Star Wars was such a gigantic crack in cinema that it kind of broke the brains of people who will, shall we say, put the money up to make a science fiction film. And so there is this sharp dividing line between before and after, where if you can find a science fiction film made after 1977 that does not have Star Wars influences, you're going to be shocked and surprised. And the question always just kind of becomes, well, did they bring anything fresh or interesting or new or to their concept of, well, we need to make something that people who like Star Wars will go watch. That's really, for me, the deciding factor on how I'm going to end up feeling over time about any of these movies. And I think I'm going to be curious, Adrian, to find out I really am going to be. I can't wait to find out what you think of this movie, because, man, has my opinion changed of this film over time. It's bizarre.
Well, I wish I had had the opportunity to see this film when I was a kid, but I'd never even heard of The Humanoid until about 2 years ago. I don't think it ever really popped up. If this had been on TV in the 80s, I would have watched it, and I was watching anything like this. I even enjoyed the Ewok movies.
Ooh.
I was watching any of this kind of Star Wars adjacent or kiddie sci-fi stuff. I loved it all. But now The Humanoid, we'll get to this a bit later, but it did get a UK cinema release.
Oh.
But then I don't think it ever showed up on video or TV or anything. I'd certainly never even heard of it. In fact, I was at a film event about 3 years ago, and I was browsing through a box of cheap old quad posters, and I picked one up for The Humanoid, and it was only £5, and I didn't buy it. And I regret it to this day, because it was only later that I realised there was an Antonio Margheriti connection for a start.
Yeah.
And I just didn't know what it was, and I didn't buy it. I spent my money on something else. In fact, I did buy a Margheriti poster that was in the same box. But anyway, I regret it, because it was only shortly after that I realised what The Humanoid was, and that was a missed opportunity. But yeah, The Humanoid is a really interesting film. But let's start off by talking just briefly about who made The Humanoid. So I've already mentioned, so Margheriti is involved with the special effects. The director is Aldo Lado, and he's perhaps best known for his work in Giallo. I'm assuming you're familiar with him and his movies.
Oh yes, definitely. His films, Short Night of the Glass Dolls and Who Saw Her Die, are exceptional giallos. They're different from, in several ways, they're different from the run-of-the-mill giallos that make them kind of stand out in an interesting way, and I recommend both of them heavily. I also recommend, for those with the ability to watch something influenced by Last House on the Left, to check out his film Murders on the Night Train, or Last Stop on the Night Train from 1975. It comes under different titles, but they always include Night Train. It's a pretty rough film, but it's also quite a good movie. It's just you kind of got to know that you're going to see some rough stuff when you push play on that one.
Yeah, that one. Is it something that's called Night Train Murders and something? Yeah. So I mean, I just watched recently Who Saw Her Die, and I think we've talked about it before about how skinny George Lazenby is in that film. It's like my main takeaway from that. But yeah, that's a great film as well. Also, Enzo Castellari was involved with The Humanoid as well. And so he's got quite a crew around him. Now, Castellari, of course, best known for he's done loads of great films, and we're going to talk about him more in a forthcoming season of the podcast. But for me, he will always be the director of Bronx Warriors.
I can understand, yeah.
I was lucky enough to meet Castellari briefly at a festival a few years ago, and I've got a signed Betamax copy of Bronx Warriors somewhere around here.
Well, I've been such a fan of Castellari. I discovered him. I did the typical backup thing of an American moron who was a teenager in the 80s. It's like I discovered his name on those post-apocalyptic films he made in the 80s. And then backed up and discovered completely crazy things like, just how good he was at like the cop movies that he made, like Street Law and High Crime and The Big Racket especially, which when that came out on DVD, that was just a brain-bending discovery. But he's made so many great films, and one I'll champion, and just really I keep hoping that if I keep talking about it, it'll come out on DVD. He made this spaghetti western in 1968 called Johnny Hamlet, which is Shakespeare's Hamlet set in the Spaghetti West, and I absolutely love it.
Johnny Hamlet.
Yeah, it's amazing. Even me just explain, if I were to go into detail and explain how they adapted it, it wouldn't do it justice. You just have to see Johnny Hamlet. It's like, when is that coming out on Blu-ray, you losers? Come on.
Yeah, there's a few of his films that are still kind of missing from general circulation, which is a shame.
Yeah, there are a couple that'll probably never come out, like The Last Shark.
Well, yes, that's the one I'd love to get a decent copy of. But yeah, Castellari's, and of course he did the original Inglourious Basterds as well. He's got such a great CV of fun films. So the Humanoid's got an interesting bunch of people behind it. On camera, we've got quite a cast, as we'll go through the plot and kind of discuss them. Our big star, as we mentioned, of course, is Richard Kiel, fresh out of Moonraker, I think, when he made this.
Yeah.
And Corin Cleary, who we've talked about before, I'm sure, when we've talked about The Hunter from the Future. And she's been in a few things. She did that great film Hitchhike, which I've got a feeling we discussed as well in the previous episode. So it's got a pretty good cast behind it, and it seemed to have had quite a good budget. We should also mention Ivan Razumov, of course, and Barbara Bach. So some great
Arthur
people
Kennedy.
in here. Of course. Yeah, so really good people in the film. And then we've got quite a decent budget. pretty interesting location shooting in Israel, which is where I mentioned before some of the stuff where it just looks like it was so hot, running around in the desert doing the stuff they were doing. But with all of that, and of course the score, but I shouldn't forget the score by none other than Morricone. So there's a lot of elements. So this film ought to be great, but is it?
Money was spent on this film, yeah.
So was it good? That is the question. Let's see if we can decide between us. So I thought what we would do is I'll go for this plot summary again, courtesy of Matt Blake, and just stop me when you want to chip in.
Okay.
So, it's very Star Wars, and we'll make some comparisons with the characters probably as we go through. So Matt Blake says it is far, far in the future. So there we go. It's different because I think Star Wars is a long time ago. And the Earth, which has been renamed Metropolis for some reason or other, presumably just to make it sound more sci-fi,
I guess,
is ruled by the benevolent and wise Great Brother. And I thought this Great Brother, who the sort of wise and benevolent, he's basically like wise and benevolent ruler Christopher Plummer, the Emperor in Star Crash.
Which means he secretly has to be some kind of horrible dictator, right?
Yeah. So he's basically, I think it's just all one big family. Now, the Great Brother has a not quite so great brother called Lord Graal. Interesting titles. We've got Great Brother and Lord Graal, played by Ivan Razumov. And Lord Graal has been in prison for years because of just being generally evil. But at the beginning of the film, he escapes from prison. And he's got some scheme in mind to get revenge on the Great Brother. And he's going to do this by hooking up with a scientist who you mentioned, played by Arthur Kennedy. Right? That's Dr. Craspin, who's invented he's invented this brilliant MacGuffin called Capitron. And I don't know, did you understand what it was Capitron does? It's kind of like...
Capitron is whatever it is, the hard to come by element that allows him to create his invincible soldiers. And I love the doctor. I love the Mad Doctor thing, Dr. Craspin. It's as if they discovered at some point when naming these characters that we have to have hard consonants because that connotates evil, Craspin. Yeah. And his plan is to use this difficult to come by substance to create an unstoppable bunch of super soldiers that he for some reason calls humanoids. It's a bizarre choice. Why don't you call them, I don't know, super soldiers or stormtroopers? I don't know, something. Stormtroopers maybe.
What does humanoid actually mean?
It means
they're not robots.
Like a humanoid, like a human, a human-ish.
They're humans, but they're like robots. They can be controlled like robots, but they're still human, I think. So he's got this thing that will create these super soldiers, and so Lord Graal sends his men to attack the scientific institute, and the buildings where all this happens are really cool.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting, when you look at it, it's an interesting mix of real, kind of really 70s sci-fi looking buildings in Israel, combined with forced perspective and miniatures created by Margheriti to make this really cool kind of science fiction cityscape in the desert.
Well, it's really amazing because the way they shot all this stuff, there's this combination of real places. I mean, real actual physical places you can see people walking around on. I mean, there's a lot of crowd shots, and you get to see these buildings that are, absolutely fascinating looking. And then they enhance it in that smart way where they've built a few outlying spots that are like watchtowers for the soldiers who are guarding the place that are obviously things they've added to the area, and then they do all this these foreground miniatures and stuff like that. And this is the point where I'm going to have to mention very clearly that if you can find a really good looking print of this film, and it's available if you look around on YouTube in proper places, these shots, the special effects in this movie, they're a cut above what you might expect for an Italian science fiction Star Wars ripoff. There's some really impressive model work and the forced perspective stuff in here, and the some of the matte shots. There's some really good stuff here. Don't get me wrong; it's not up to the level of something that you would have expected. You would have expected to see in an American-made film of the same vintage, but at the same time, it's really effective stuff, and it's kind of amazing when you look at the team that was assembled to do this. You mentioned Margheriti, but one of the guys who was responsible for creating a lot of the miniatures for different areas of the film was a guy named Emilio Ruiz, and this is a guy who did a lot of this kind of stuff, and he built several of the models for this. I mean, he worked on the two Conan films. He ended up winning awards for his work on Guillermo del Toro films later on, including Pan's Labyrinth and The Devil's Backbone and stuff like that. For doing, for building like foreground models and doing matte shots and things like this. So there's a level of competence to the special effects in this film that is, I hate to say it, but kind of unexpected.
Yeah, it's a great looking film, and it kind of makes Star Crash look like the poor relation.
Yeah.
The sets that they're using, and like you said, the location. I mean, when in Star Crash, when they go on location, they're just in a quarry somewhere or on a beach.
Yeah.
There's not much going on, or in a cave. It's pretty cheap looking. But yeah, this film really does look pretty great. So we've got this lab, and the labs is where Dr. Craspin did all this work before he teamed up with Lord Graal. Oh, and we mustn't forget Lady Agatha.
Oh, yes.
Who I think is Lord Graal's girlfriend, and she's 200 years old and is being kept young by... she's basically like a Countess Bathory type who's being kept alive by some kind of serum made from the blood of young women.
I know. And this is one of the reasons why she's happy to keep Dr. Craspin around, because it's his treatment that's keeping her incredibly young looking. Yeah. And of course, she's played by Barbara Bach, so she's absolutely gorgeous. But
she's got the most amazingly crimped hair.
Yes, I know.
Her hair it's fantastic. It's crimped to be like a massive hood, but it's her hair.
It's a gorgeous thing. It actually her hair deserves its own credit in the film, and it doesn't get it. It's a shame.
It's like her hair has been made into Darth Vader's helmet.
I know.
It's pretty spectacular.
Well, just as an aside, are you? Well, I don't know if the right word would be surprised, but are you kind of impressed maybe with how many horror film elements are woven throughout this story?
Yeah, and it's surprising because this, you would expect this to just be a film for kids. But then you've got stuff that is not suitable for kids. I mean, so the first time we see this process take place, they bring this woman in to this basically like a room full of. She's put into this machine full of needles. Mm-hmm. It's like what we would have called an Iron Maiden, except these needles are all going to stab into her and then suck out all of her blood. And she's naked, and you see these needles go right into her chest.
Right.
And the first time I saw this, I thought, hang on, this is overstepped the mark a little bit.
Well, I mean, it's interesting to know that. I mean, first of all, the scene you're talking about is kind of impressive, and they knew it was impressive when they made the movie, because I mean, in certain countries, the ad art, the poster art, was used that image as the basis for the paintings for the advertisements for the film, and yet the way that this movie usually gets chopped down for television or to turn it into kind of a PG friendly film is to simply remove all the shots of that naked woman and this these needles going into her body, and that's about all the film really needs to a certain degree to kind of soften it up a little bit. But it's bizarre because it is intrinsic to this horror element where we've got this, as you say, Elizabeth Bathory character who's being kept alive by the blood of younger women. It's bizarre.
And it sort of seems like they didn't quite know who the target audience was for this film. Maybe they hadn't quite realised yet that Star Wars was primarily skewed young. I mean, obviously now most original Star Wars fans are in their 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
But at the time, they were all kids, and that's not something that kids needed to see.
They might want to see it, but need to see is a
it's
different matter, yeah.
Quite surprising. Yeah, it's an interest. The tone is, not very appropriate or consistent in this film. It's kind of strange. It's like it skews too old for the main audience, but also too young for the other audience. So,
but the elements that skew in those two age directions are distinct and bizarrely removable. From one thing to the other. It's strange. Yeah. It's an odd combination.
Yeah. So Kral has teamed up. So he's got Craspin and he's got Lady Agatha, and he sends his soldiers to overthrow Metropolis and steal Capitron from this lab. And loads of people get killed. The only survivor appears to be, now this makes me laugh every time I think about it. So the lab assistant is called Barbara Gibson.
Right.
And this brings us back to a discussion we've had previously that you've also had on your podcast about names of characters in sci-fi.
Yes.
It's so funny because they even they won't just call her Barbara. They always say Barbara Gibson, Barbara Gibson, Barbara Gibson, Barbara Gibson.
Barbara Gibson.
Especially that Barbara Gibson.
Her name is Barbara Gibson.
I know. Why did they? Okay, let's point out to people that here are the character names in this film: Lady Agatha, Dr. Craspin, Tom, who's a character we haven't talked about quite yet. The Great Brother, Lord Growl, Golob, and Barbara Gibson.
Barbara Gibson.
What in the name of God were they thinking?
I mean, even they could have used her own name. Corinne Cleary sounds more science fiction than Barbara Gibson.
I know, you're right.
Who is Barbara Gibson, and why did they give her that name? It's so funny. It's just the most un-sci-fi name. But the fact that they just keep saying it all the time as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe just once and then forget about it, fine. But over and over again, Barbara Gibson, Barbara Gibson.
Barbara Gibson.
Especially that Barbara Gibson.
Her name is Barbara Gibson.
Yeah, I know. It's as if it's a hyphenated name, as if you can't just say Barbara. It's bizarre.
There's also the kind of heroic love interest, Nick. It's like they ran out of good names in the end.
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to bring up Nick because at least with Nick, once again, you're only dealing with a single syllable name, and who knows how that's spelled, right? That could be anything.
Could be short for some kind of science fiction-y name.
Yeah, for Nickelodeus Nicodemus, or who the hell knows, right?
Barbara Dixon. Barbara Dixon, I just said. Barbara Gibson.
Barbara Gibson.
Could be Barbara Dixon. That makes just as much sense.
Yes, it does.
So Graal and Craspin, they get the Capitron, but for some reason they've only got enough initially to test it on one person. So they're looking around to see who they're going to test it on.
Yeah, we need a proof of concept segment here. We need to prove this works.
Meanwhile, so we cut to a space captain who's flying around the galaxy in his little ship on his own.
He appears to be some kind of cop of some type, yeah.
Yeah. He's only got his robot dog for company. And this is, of course, Golob.
Yeah, this is Golob, played by Richard Kiel. Should we talk about this damn robot dog now, or shall I just string out my hatred of this thing throughout the entire discussion? So.
Oh, I think you should string it out. His robot dog is called Kip. Now, as I say, it's 1979. I think by this point, I'm pretty sure we've already met K9 in Doctor Who.
This is true.
I think K9
Oh, you have,
first appeared,
definitely.
K9 first appeared in 1977. So I think Kip has to be inspired partly by K9, but they've also made it look a little bit like R2-D2.
Oh, yeah.
It's a kind of R2-D2 K9 crossbreed, if you like. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, go on then. Tell us why you don't like the dog.
Okay, first of all, folks, one of the things that cropped up consistently in Star Wars ripoffs were, of course, some way in which because producers and writers didn't completely comprehend exactly what R2-D2 and C-3PO connotated within the film. They just knew, got to have robots of some type. So what we have here is someone's attempt to create what we need is a robot. We need a robot that can be played for laughs, that we can get some jokes out of. Let's see. What would be the most lovable version? Ooh, we'll make it look like a dog. There we go. Okay, so it look like a dog. This is good. This has been proven to be just a standard thing in cinema. You make something look like a dog. It's easy. People identify with it. Kids love dogs. This is perfect. This is awesome. What if you had a dog that could never die? Okay, don't think down those roads. Don't go down that path. So what we have here is a dog that's a robot. That's the comedy sidekick that will just pop up occasionally, and it'll always be clear that this thing really, really can't function. But all those shots of R2-D2 somehow walking, somehow like maneuvering his way through the Tatooine desert, we'll have a great visual that'll look a whole lot like that. The kids will love it. They'll soak it up. And I'm telling you now, every time they use this dog in this film, I just want to hit it with a sledgehammer. I want this robot dog. He's there. He serves a good purpose. He has one good purpose that he serves throughout the film, which he has to have. Richard Kiel's character has to have something in the first part of the movie to talk to, so that we can get, essentially information dumps, so that we can get a sense of what the hell is happening or what's going through this character's mind without him being a lunatic just jabbering away to himself. And that I get. I understand that. But there came a point in the movie, especially watching it a second time here recently, where I realized that they could have gotten much more out of this movie, and it would have made it a little bit darker. I understand that. So maybe that's why they shied away from it. If the character is used that way in the first part of the movie and then gets blown up, like gets shot by like Lord Growl's bad guy soldiers and blown all to crap, and then you get all the pathos and the dark feelings of, oh my goodness, they destroyed the robot dog. But you could have even had them rebuild the damn thing and bring it back at the end of the movie if you wanted to like make the kids leave, screenings of this thing feeling better. But no, they keep the damn dog throughout the movie, and it's irritating every time, because it's like, I'm sorry, I hate to put it this way, they often use the comedic reactions of the dog to give you some emotional import when some of the other actors on screen can't pull it off.
Yeah. And it also, it's not even a very good robot. It's like a very poor remote control. Its tail is the aerial for the remote control.
Yeah.
And it seems to, it's on casters, and it seems to struggle a little bit to get across the desert. It's just quite, it's not great.
Like I say,
and also,
if they'd used it the first part of the film to give him something to talk to and then blown it up, that would have been very interesting, but they don't go that route.
But also, in Star Wars, the R2 units have, a purpose. They're quite useful. They're like a tool.
Exactly.
Whereas this is basically just there for him to talk to. He might as well just had a parrot, or a robot parrot. But yeah, so he's flying around the galaxy. He's like a space captain. He's a little bit like the kind of Han Solo type space captain. I don't know what we could call him, but he's like Han Solo and Chewbacca rolled into one, because he is Richard Kiel and he's about 7 foot something tall. Now, what I do like about this, and he's also got a beard, and he looks weird with a beard. I
think he looks better with a beard than without it, though.
Yeah, well, possibly, but I think it's a stuck-on beard. I don't think it's a real beard.
It's definitely a stuck-on beard.
Yeah, so we're just funny looking. But this is the most, I think, in any film, I might be wrong, write in and tell me, I think this is the most dialogue Richard Kiel ever has in any film he's ever done.
It has to be, and it was a bad idea to do that. I'm not trying to be mean-spirited or anything here, but let's be straightforward. Richard Kiel was a limited actor, and there are lengths of dialogue here where he's rattling it off, and there's a part of me that wonders how many takes they got into before they got it to that level, and I fear for the director's mindset. It's just like, he's not I mean, as a presence on screen, he's wonderful. But the idea of giving Richard Kiel just loads of expository dialogue was never a great concept.
Are your circuits clogged or something? This is no time for games. Who programmed you anyway? If you want to play games, go outside and play. It's all right, kid. Don't worry, boy. We'll get out of this somehow. You know, the worst that can happen to us is we'll spend 2,000 years in suspended animation.
They should have given the dialogue to the dog.
Oh, they're not. You know what? That you're not wrong. You're
and
not
had
wrong.
him just listening and nodding. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, it is probably the most. It's probably the best part he ever had for him.
It's the
in terms
meatiest
of
part, I think. Yeah.
having stuff to do. But yeah, so for like the first kind of good third of the movie, he's got dialogue. He's a hero. He's a nice guy. It's pretty good for him. But then, of course, he gets hit by the Capitron, which is a ray. Do they do it? I can't remember. Do they? How do they hit him with the Capitron?
It's kind of like this glittery stuff.
Yeah.
It's kind of strange.
He gets attacked by the Capitron, and then all his hair falls out of his beard. His beard falls off, which is kind of weird. I don't know if all of his bodily hair falls off or just.
That's a terrifying thought you just put in my head.
Yeah,
there,
I don't know what. It's just sort of a weird side effect of Capitron is that you can't have a beard. But then he becomes the Richard Kiel that we know and love. He becomes a monosyllabic destruction machine.
He becomes the Hulk, essentially.
Yeah. And then he seems to be indestructible and just goes around terrorizing and smashing up the place. So Barbara, who I think knows how to stop it, is obviously going to be on the case. But of course we can't forget as well, Barbara has a friend who in my blog about this I described him as her ward, and his name is Tom Tom. And now Tom Tom is basically Luke Skywalker and Yoda combined into one character.
Well, yeah, but a year before Yoda even existed. Yeah, this is true.
He's like a small Asian boy dressed like Luke Skywalker, but with fortune cookie wisdom.
And bizarre powers of some sort.
Yeah, and he's got undefined... I think at some point he's described, somewhere I read, they describe him as being from Tibet. I think it might be one of the reviews I read. He's got like this kind of mysticism associated with the fact that he's Asian, so therefore he's got mystical powers. It's a little bit Orientalist, I think, from that point of view.
Yeah.
He's got kind of undefined psychic abilities or telekinetic powers or something, and he can somehow psychically connect to Golob. Barbara Gibson knows she knows that she was friends, I think, with Golob, so she's going to try and get through to him as well. And then they've got Nick, who's also going to help. Nick is her boyfriend, and they've got to stop him. So he's turned into this humanoid, and meanwhile Graal, who is dressed like he's basically Darth Vader, but with a mask that looks like he's kind of a cross between Darth Vader and a gladiator,
or Darth Vader and like an American football helmet. It's bizarre.
Yeah, it's like instead of the full mask, they've cut eye holes in it and a mouth hole for him to breathe a bit more easily.
Yep.
So we can just about see Ivan Rasimov's face under there. But I mean, I said this in my blog. It is so much like Star Wars. It's a miracle they didn't get sued. I mean, even the set. So not only his costume, the sets look like they were just sneaking onto Elstree at night when nobody was around and shooting and all this. Because there's quite a few bits where it just looks like they're walking along corridors of the Death Star. It's pretty uncanny.
It's true, yeah.
Because obviously with Star Crash, nobody involved had actually seen Star Wars, but by the time they made this one, everyone had seen it. So they were able to base the designs much more closely on what Star Wars looked like, and it's pretty uncanny. So anyway, so they've got this plan. They want to overthrow the Great Brother. So whilst they've got Richard Kiel here just walking around smashing everything at their command, they're trying to build a weapon that can carry enough Capitron that they can turn the entire population of Metropolis into their slaves. And with those slaves, they can overthrow the universe or something. Have I got that about right?
It's about right. Lord Grawl intends to take his brother's place and become the ruler of the universe or galaxy. I forget exactly how they phrase it. And Lady Agatha makes it very clear. I kind of enjoy the dialogue between the two of them when he asks her what her intentions are, why she's going along with this and helping, and she's just like, just essentially just using you as a means to an end. And I think that's kind of nice. It's very interesting, but
yeah, it is. It is a pretty good dynamic between those two. There's a lot of so basically. I mean, so it basically builds up to a big fight on the base with loads of people firing blaster guns around. Now there are no lightsabers in this one.
No.
But there are two mysterious white-robed figures who are somehow connected to Tom Tom, and they occasionally just show up and shoot an arrow, which is like a kind of laser light arrow.
Yeah, it's
so
one of the most bizarre elements of this film, and that's saying something.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's this big old shootout at the end. I think eventually, so they managed to get... So Golob, after being the bad guy for a while, Tom Tom's psychic powers, and Barbara Gibson, they managed to tame the Golob.
Yeah, and Tom Tom's psychic abilities or somehow, or telepathic abilities somehow allow him to like free Golob from the control of the evil mad scientist. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so they all team up together to then fight back against Lord Graal, and there's a very long big shootout in the base where they're trying to stop them from being able to use or launch this missile that they've made. And of course they win, and everything's happy. But that's not really, the story is not the important part, I think. What's great about this film is like we've mentioned already, the special effects are very good, the sets are very good. There's a lot of really good miniature work of space stuff as well.
Yeah, it's really surprising.
Yeah, you can tell that Margheriti and his gang, they've sat down and watched Star Wars a number of times and made some notes, because there's a lot of shots of things like Star Destroyers. Golob's ship looks like a Millennium Falcon. There's some good shots of space and planets and smaller spaceships docking, and all kinds of cool stuff. I mean, so Margheriti had obviously done this stuff before a bit in his own films, as well as Mission Stardust, where he was the special effects supervisor on that one. And the space special effects are great. And then he, as we mentioned as well, the way that he created this space city in Israel is also really cool. The place, I've looked it up online, the place is called Eliat, and it's some kind of facility that they found and used. But what he did to make those sets look bigger and look more spacey, he did again a few years later in Treasure Island in outer space.
Yeah,
where he's taken various bits of cities and then made them, so he sort of sci-fi them up by basically, like you were saying, that use forced perspective and miniatures and things.
Well, it's all in how you frame shots, where you can use these very interesting bits of architecture to kind of give you a futuristic feeling. It's amazing.
So it's really great. If you're a Star Wars fan with a sense of humour, I think you would enjoy this film a lot.
I do too.
Think if you take Star Wars too seriously, then maybe you just find the whole thing incredibly offensive. I don't know. But I think it's great fun. So, I mean, in his book, Matt Blake talks about it at length, and he mentions how Aldo Lado regretted his involvement in the film, which seems a shame. I think basically he didn't have any other work, and so he just had to take it.
Well, I think that one of the reasons, and not that Lado seems to say this straightforwardly, but I think he was stepping outside of his comfort zone to do a science
Yeah.
fiction film in the first place. And
True.
and if you look at his films before that, you realize that they were very contemporary set films, and they're the kinds of things that as a director you can exert a fair amount of control over every aspect of those earlier films. You shoot a giallo or a crime film, you know exactly, you can envision it all very effectively, where with a science fiction film there are huge chunks of it you just got to turn over to the technicians and give them the idea of what you want, and whether you get that or not is really kind of up in the air until later on in the production. And I think that may factor into why this director feels kind of regretful about it, because he couldn't, like I say, this is just me surmising it and looking at this being the only film in his career where he would have had to have dealt with these kind of elements. And I can understand that. And it also, I think, with that opening fight sequence where he acquiesced to them bringing in Enzo Castellari to shoot that segment, because Castellari knew action very effectively, and that's not something that Lado had a lot of experience with. And so there's the knowledge that there's a section of the movie that kind of gets the ball rolling right at the start of the movie that feels a little bit different from the rest of the movie. But if you don't know that somebody else directed those segments, it wouldn't matter to you. You just think, oh, well, it gets this exciting start. But at the same time, as the director, as the director of credit, knowing that there was a portion of your film you were also ceding to another director probably plays into his feelings too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the film, it's got a good pace. You're never really bored.
No, it moves moves pretty well. It's a quick 90 minutes overall. Yeah.
So Elder Lado is quoted in here. He's saying, at that point, he said, "I searched desperately for another film to do, but I couldn't find anything. So I did The Humanoid for the money. I swear to you, it's the only film of my entire career where, when I got to the set in the morning, I wanted to top myself."
Yeah.
So he's really not having a good time. There's a review mentioned in here, an Italian review, where it says so it talks about the fact that it summarizes the plot. The results, aside from the coarseness of the infantile story, settings and narrative developments, are on a technical level of those of a mediocre imitation of the American model as established by Star Wars. And I mean, that's kind of fair enough, but I still think it's a shame. I mean, I suppose the trouble is with us, and certainly I feel this way, I've got a lot of sympathy for films like this, whereas if you're just a reviewer watching 10 films a week, you're probably not going to have as much patience or specific kind of fondness for the genre.
Yeah,
whereas
I agree.
people like us are going to be far more patient.
Yeah.
With
Well, that's what I mean. That's kind of what I was alluding to earlier when I asked you, because I first saw this film in kind of a rush of attempting to locate, obscure European exploitation films from this period. More than I'd say 10 or 12 years ago, and what I saw was a really not particularly good looking copy, and I kind of watched it, soaked up what it was, and went, okay, well, it's not that spectacular, it's not that interesting. But I have to admit, having gone back to it now with not a perfect copy, but a much better looking copy of this film, I have to admit that my opinion over time has changed, and I don't consider it to be the half-assed piece of garbage that I kind of felt that it was the first time I watched it. Interesting elements, but not particularly good, was essentially my feelings about it before. But now I'm much more much more impressed with what's on screen, and I enjoy it a lot more. Some of that is me getting older and seeing more things and understanding more about what I'm looking at, and also just having a better looking view of the damn movie. But I will say this: it's a fascinating movie, and it's one that I know there's a part of me that kind of wants to start screaming from the rooftops, "You need to go see this movie!" And there's another part of me that knows 90% of the people that would hear me say that will watch it and think that I'm insane.
Well, yeah. This is kind of why I was thinking it would be great to do a Star Wars rip-offs festival, because then you could your audience would know what they were in for.
Right.
and they'd all have a really great time. I think if you've got the right audience, this is a very enjoyable movie.
And that's just it. If you can narrow cast this to people who, like, for instance, ask them, have you ever seen Star Crash? And if they get a big grin on their face, it's like, okay, well, then you need to see The Humanoid. But if they get that look like they just smelled a horrible dead animal, then it's like, okay, well, then you don't need to recommend The Humanoid to this person at all.
Star Crash is definitely the better known of the two films, even though in many ways, I mean, and also I think ultimately, if I had to choose which film I was going to watch again, I'd probably watch Star Crash.
Well, I would say that too, except if somebody were to put out I beg the universe for this to eventually exist, a Blu-ray special edition of The Humanoid would make me want to rewatch this just because I've seen it fewer times. But plus, there are visuals in this that I think HD would do a world of joy to, because there's so much within this movie. Don't get me wrong; it's also going to point out more of the obvious technical flaws, but at the same time, there's some really good work being done in this movie, regardless of the bizarre combination of adult horror level aesthetics and juvenile space fantasy stuff that doesn't always gel properly. There's some interesting things here, at least visually, and plus it's got an Ennio Morricone score. It's bizarre. Come on.
Yeah, the Morricone score. I mean, I was surprised when I saw Morricone's name in the credits, because I was thinking all the way through, oh, this score is terrible.
It's bizarre. It's electronic.
Yeah, it doesn't sound great. It's like he's just discovered a synthesizer for the first time.
Well, I think some of it, in certain parts of the movie, I think the score works very well. And then there are others where it almost seems to be rubbing against the grain. It's strange.
It's off-putting.
All of you!
And they were trying to make a sci-fi sounding soundtrack, but of course what made Star Wars work so well was the orchestral soundtrack, and again, and the same with Star Crash. So I can see why they'd maybe want to try something different, but it's too different.
It's too different.
Doesn't really work. But the film, interestingly, obviously, although it's made, I think it was made slightly later than Star Crash, I think, but it certainly came out in the UK at the same time as Star Crash. In fact, the films are both reviewed on the same page of the monthly film bulletin, which is interesting. I think it came out in the same month. It's like you wait forever for a Star Wars rip-off to come out, and then two come along at the same time. And it was viewed very clearly in the review that I've read. They just say that it's virtually indistinguishable from other attempts to cash in on the success of Star Wars. So there was no fooling anybody that this was anything but a Star Wars rip-off.
There's an interesting Richard Kiel, both in his autobiography and in a couple of other places online, has talked about the making of this movie, and this is pretty interesting. Here's a quote from Richard Kiel, looking back, years and years later. He says, "The Humanoid could have been a huge success in America and the UK had the Italians been able to work with direct sound. Unfortunately, they were so used to dubbing everything later that it was impossible to get the crew to stop hammering and talking during the filming. While this may work for Italian movie patrons, it wouldn't have worked for American and British audiences. In my opinion, American International, who were the ones who distributed it in the States, was able to use the dubbing as an excuse to get out of their obligation to distribute the film in America, but perhaps the real reason was that they were going through some financial difficulties at the time and simply didn't have the cash to pick up and distribute the film as they had originally planned. I say this because in spite of the dubbing, Columbia did release it in foreign markets. The film had potential to be kind of a spaghetti Star Wars, and I think that it would have found an audience made up of fans like other Star Wars fans, who appreciated the valiant efforts that director Aldo Lado made against all odds. Unfortunately, it doesn't stand up today because of the technical advances that have been made in the area of computer graphics and stuff like that. But he goes on to say that he thinks that this is years ago. He says, I think a DVD version that built to sell to a niche audience could probably do pretty well, and maybe the film would find an audience in the States that way. And I think he's probably, like I say, I've already been saying that to a degree.
Yeah.
But I think it's obvious that Kiel's experience working on an Italian set, the way they do things, was a bit disconcerting to say the least. And having all this crap going on all the time seems to have been really incredibly distracting, which not much of a shock, really.
Now, I'm sure, didn't I watch this isn't it available with an English track?
Oh yeah, definitely. It was done. It was done, but he's surmising, and this is just Kiel surmising that the fact that it was dubbed, even though I think almost all of the actors are at least speaking in English, so the dub matches really effectively. And like Arthur Kennedy's doing his own voice, and so's Barbara Bach. I mean, they're doing their own dubbing. But he's wondering why AIP apparently had a hand in financing the movie, or at least putting up some cash for it, and he's just surmising on why they ended up being distributed in the States by Columbia instead. Of course, one of the odder things about it is that you'll notice there's a name in the credits attributed as one of the writers. If you look, it's sometimes listed as uncredited or something along those lines. But in actuality, some of the English dialogue, or at least some of the dialogue as used in the English translation, was supposedly written by someone named Gary. Wait a minute, what's the guy's name here?
Gary Rusoff.
Gary Rusoff, and apparently that is like a cousin or some kind of extended family member of Arkoff.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah. And if you look this guy up, I mean, he's a guy who's written several novels, but and has several. He's got limited. He apparently wrote The Evictors, which is a mid-70s kind of little country period thriller done by Charles Pierce, and so it's
which was AIP as well, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's
it looks
one of those,
like
it's all these strange little connections and all these little things that are behind the scenes that allow a movie like this to get made. And when you start digging into them, and there are all these threads that come out, it's like it's such a weird soup for how things like this get made. And talking about the score, yeah, it is odd. It's almost as if, and I don't know enough about Morricone's career. You said that it sounds like Morricone just like discovered a Moog synthesizer and went crazy. That's kind of what I think too. But I don't have enough knowledge of his career to know when he started fiddling with electronics. But I will say this: I think that it's true. This is one of those scores where it plays better without the movie than with it sometimes, because it's you have to kind of key into what he's doing to enjoy it, but at the same time it's very different from the full orchestral scores of things like Star Wars or Star Crash.
Yeah.
And that may have been what they wanted, get those otherworldly sounds as to be part of the score itself. And like I say, there are scenes where I think it works, but yeah, if it pushes you away from the movie, I could really understand that.
But overall, I really enjoy this film, and it's a film that people need to see. And you can find, like you said, there are pretty decent copies of it out there. It's yet to get any kind of decent home release, as far as I can tell. It doesn't look like it's been released on video even.
Well, I tell you right now, the most
on television.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say the best looking version of it I found on YouTube is one that just got uploaded on July the 31st of this year. Strangely enough,
right. We should tweet that one out.
Yeah, I'll put that up. I'll put that up and let people get a shot at it. I'll even put it up on my blog so people can take a look at it if they want to. But it's the clearest version I've seen of this movie yet. I don't know what the source material is, and I don't know how long this particular version will be up there. Right now, it's got less than 200 views, but it's an incredibly clear and much more sharp copy than I've seen of it anywhere else, and it really does allow you to get an idea of what might be possible if somebody could do an HD version of this film, because it really is. I mean, don't get me wrong, it makes some of the stuff look even wonkier, but at the same time, that's part of the joy of it, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially like you said, the Margaritti's special effects are so good; they deserve to be seen in as high a res as possible. I think possibly it did come out once on DVD in Italy, and that's where this print comes from.
That could be.
The copy that I have is from that original Italian DVD, so that might be where it's from. But yeah, it's an impressive looking film, and one that needs to be seen.
Well, bonus points in my mind for a lot of the costume design too.
Yeah.
A lot of care and time was taken on the costume design in this. I mean, they're clearly adhering to the basic Star Wars pattern of evil characters have to wear black, and I really do love. You would think that it would be the Lord Growl costume that would be the most impressive, but I have to admit, I like what Arthur Kennedy is forced to wear as the mad scientist. The high collar and everything. It's amazing.
Yeah. And Lady Agatha's costume just reminds me of Sybil Danning in Battle Beyond the Stars.
Yeah, which also came out after this, similar, which is interesting. Yeah, that's
very
true.
Similar costume. Very similarly revealing. Again, slightly unsuitable for the young audience that they might be going for. I know the film was cut to get an A certificate when it came out in the UK.
They took that nudity out, I'm betting.
So I'm assuming it's at least that scene. If nothing else, but yeah, it's a great film. Do your best to check it out. We'll tweet out the YouTube link. I met. I'm not going to tell the story now, but I met Richard Kiel once, and I made him angry. And he is a man. He's a man you do not want to make angry.
What did you do?
Well, if the listener wants to find out how I made him angry, check out my blog, which I'm going to tweet out on the Humanoid from a couple of years ago, because we're rapidly running to quite a long episode. So if I tell that story, we'll be here all day. But
well, I will just say one more thing, which is that this film. Well, actually, two more things. This film. To hire Ivan Rassimov and to mostly hide his very expressive face seems like a bit of a crime.
I know. He's a good-looking man.
Well, he's good-looking, and he's also extremely good at looking like a dodgy person, or even a really evil and vengeful kind of person. And the fact that costume covers up so much of his face, it's like, man, he's really good at this kind of stuff. If you could see past that metal crap in front of his nose.
I'm sure that he probably argued that they had to show at least some of his face, because when he saw the Darth Vader costume, he's like, nope, I'm not wearing. You've got to show some of my face at least. So they cut some holes in it, but you still can't see quite enough of him. Oh, and
in my continuing quest to be as bizarre with this kind of stuff as I can be, there is actually, believe it or not, a song. A song out there that was inspired by the Humanoid.
Oh, good.
By a band called it's a U.S. band named Ganymede. They recorded a song called "Love Games." Now, with that title, you would not have any idea that, of course, it had anything to do with the Humanoid. But they've been very clear about it and have written about the fact. And if you read the lyrics, it's very clear that this is. I mean, it lays it all out there. But the name of the song is "Love Games" by the band Ganymede. They've been very happy to talk about it in the past. It was done in the early 80s, I think. Right. But the strange effects of odd science fiction films like this. Yes, there is a song in this world that was inspired by the Humanoid.
Well, I'll see if I can track it down and stick it on at the end. So thanks for the tip. Now, before we go, I wanted to mention, and I forgot this last time we recorded, but we've had an email, and I didn't want to ignore that because it's a really good email. So I'm going to read it out. This is from somebody called Mike Rosenbaum, and he said, "Hi folks, I'm a new listener to the podcast and really enjoyed the episode on War of the Planets. Having seen most of this sci-fi series, your description of writing ideas on post-it notes, filming 4 movies back to back, and then handing the unlabeled reels to an editor was a revelation. It all makes perfect sense now." So he's obviously talking about the Cosmos War of the Planets.
Yes.
And how just confusing that whole thing was. Occasionally I've seen a few Italian genre films on TV over the years, but recently discovered most while looking for feature films on YouTube. I'm glad that many are in the public domain, but hope that more will be preserved, restored, and hopefully get in the spotlight with a streaming channel somewhere. Maybe Movie Detective could pick up a few more like they did with Assignment Outer Space.
Oh, like Film Detective, you mean? Yeah.
Film Detective, yeah. He says, "I've delved into all the sci-fi, peplum, polizioteschi, and giallo that I can find, but my favourite has been the Euro spy films." And I'm sure we can all go along with that. Well, I don't know. Yeah. It's hard to choose, but I like them all. But yes, Euro spy's great. He says, "Although I enjoyed Bond films over the years, mostly the early ones, the Euro spy films have been less pretentious, and the soundtracks can be memorable. The period, European scenery." Quite often because these films were European co-productions and they're just basically touristing around the different countries that have thrown them money. So it's like, we need to go and have a scene. We need to go and have a scene in this bull ring in Barcelona. And now I've suddenly got to run off to Paris. And it's just following the money of whoever was funding them. Yes. Style and fashion and action make them enjoyable for repeat viewings. When I see a stuntman jumping between moving vehicles, it is more exciting to know that there wasn't any CGI or even medical insurance involved.
True.
He says he likes to make a mixtape of this, or he would like to make a mixtape of the soundtracks if he can get one of his old cassette workers recording. Wow, his cassette recorders working. So he's going to go old school and make a proper tape.
Wow.
And then he's also made us a list of some of his favourites that he's found on YouTube. And then he says, "Thanks for the great show. Looking forward to the next one." So, thanks, Mike. Here's some of the films that he likes that he's found on YouTube. Top Secret, also called Segretissimo from 1966. Sicario 77. I don't know that one. Secret Agent Fireball.
Oh, I've seen that one.
Yeah. 008 Operation Exterminate. That's a great name, but I haven't seen that one. Lightning Bolt, and now that one is a Margheriti one.
Yeah.
So do know that one. Copland Saves His Skin. Now I've heard of the Copland Eurospy films, but I'm not familiar with them, I think. Yeah, I don't know that one at all.
I don't know that I'm familiar with them,
Yeah, I don't know that one at all. Then he's mentioned a couple of favourite giallos, Eye in the Labyrinth, and The Hook, and Polizioteschi's Almost Human, which is, of course, a masterpiece.
Amazing.
And then an early Italian crime film, Johnny Cool. I can't remember who's in Johnny Cool.
Oh my goodness! The same actor, one of the same actors who's in Almost Famous. I mean, Almost Human.
Thomas Milian.
No. The other the actor who plays the cop. Oh, good Lord! The American actor. I can't believe I'm blanking on his name.
Henry Silva.
Henry Silva. Pardon me.
Of course. Yeah. He's always good. Anyway, so thanks, Mike. It's always good to hear people's favourite films, particularly obviously in this kind of area. Now we are going to do Eurospy at some point, and probably Peplum, Polizioteschi is high on the list. There's some good films in there. Giallo, we might sneak some in, but yeah, all great. So thank you very much for all of that. So yeah, that's about it for all the mail. People do also contact us on Twitter, so if you want to talk to us, send us information about your favourite films or comments on episodes, then do that. You can find us on Twitter, and can I remember what we are called on Twitter? What's our username? Here we go. I'm just going to boringly look it up. Oh yeah, of course we are the Wild Wild Pod on Twitter. So do and look us up. We're also on Instagram. Just search for Wild Wild Podcast. Now, Rod, on your blog, we should plug your latest post on there, because you've collected a nice little bunch of humanoid lobby cards and posters.
Oh yeah, that's
which
true.
are very cool. So
well, there's some amazing artwork that was done for this film around the world, and it's worth checking some of it out. Yeah.
So where can we find your blog?
It is the Bloody Pit of Rod. You can actually find the address is pitofrod.blogspot.com. That's the kind of launching point for both my podcasts and news and strange ideas about all kinds of film.
I love the painting of Richard Kiel's character on the Italian poster. He's basically sort of bestride the globe, looking like a total hero, in a costume that doesn't really look much like his actual costume in the movie. And he also looks much more handsome.
It's almost as if they were trying to portray that character as something other than what he was. It's strange.
Yeah, yeah, not like film posters at all.
No.
Exaggerate what's really going on. Okay, well, anyway, thank you everybody for listening. I think that's been our brief coverage of the Humanoid, also known in Germany as Fight for the Fifth Galaxy, which, why not?
That's really one of its alternate titles? Holy
yeah, Kampf und die... Hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Kampf die Fünf Galaxis.
Well, I knew Cosmos King was an alternate title, but I hadn't heard that one. Wow.
Yeah, it's on some of the lobby cards. That's pretty funny. Anyway, so yeah, these films again always have multiple titles. Speaking of which, we're going to be coming up. We've got 2 films left.
Yeah.
For this season, both of which have multiple titles, but we'll talk more about those when we get to them. Now, I think we may have hit the high point already of the season. The next 2 films are going to be interesting.
They are.
Not necessarily good, but hopefully interesting. This is sort of torturing ourselves towards the end, I suppose.
A little bit, yeah.
Because we're covering a genre's rise and fall, then as it starts to run out of steam, the last couple of films are going to be a bit painful. But hey, let's think more positively. I'm sure Beast in Space will have something to offer.
Hey, sometimes the dregs of a genre can offer more entertainment value than you would expect.
Yeah, we'll at least have something to laugh about, if nothing else. Okay, thank you very much again, Rod, for joining me and for doing some research and generally being much better prepared than I am. It's always a pleasure to talk to you about these films. Thank you, and thank you everybody for listening. Bye for now.
Bye-bye, everyone.
his ordinary life. No one ever coming and no one ever going. He flies alone all through the night. And then one day he came upon a strange ship floating in the sky. Copy, copy, do you read me? But they never bothered to reply. And then she came into his life. He fell from the skies into her arms under her spell. He used to be a man, but nothing ever stays the same for victims of her love games. controls his every thought, his every wish and his every desire, and everything that he's been taught. If only he could break away before he falls into the void. But when he sees her, his heart takes him over, and he becomes a humanoid. And then she came into his life. He fell from the skies into her arms under her spell. He used to be a man, but nothing ever stays the same for victims of her love games. Love games. Love games. Love games. And then she